Thief! My daughter-in-law's scream shattered the Christmas dinner, her eyes blazing as she yanked her Rolex from my jacket pocket. Guests gasped, their stares heavy with judgment, while I stood accused, my reputation crumbling. But as Esther demanded the police, I couldn't stop laughing. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The grocery bags felt heavier than usual as I climbed the front steps of my Boulder home that December evening. Floyd Henderson sat on my porch like a statue, his weathered hands gripping his baseball cap so tight I could see the white of his knuckles from 20 feet away. In 32 years of living next door to each other, Floyd had never waited on my porch without calling first. "Evening, Floyd." I set the bags down next to the door, my breath forming small clouds in the crisp Colorado air. "Everything all right?" He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he stared at the wooden planks beneath his feet, working that cap in his hands like prayer beads. "Barney, I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to say this." A cold that had nothing to do with December settled in my chest. Floyd Henderson wasn't a man who struggled with words. He was direct, honest, the kind of neighbor who'd tell you straight if your hedge needed trimming or your dog was barking too much. Seeing him wrestle with silence sent warning bells through my mind. "Well, you're here now," I said, leaning against the porch railing. "Might as well get it out." Floyd finally looked up, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: pity. That look hit me harder than any words could have. "It's about Esther, your daughter-in-law." The mention of Percy's wife made me straighten. Esther had been part of our family for 3 years now, ever since she and my son married in that small ceremony downtown. She was efficient, organized, always offering to help with this or that around the house. Sometimes I wondered if she was too helpful, but I'd chalk that up to generational differences. "What about Esther?" Floyd shifted on the step, his work boots scraping against the wood. "She's been talking to people, about you, saying things that—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "What kind of things?" "She told Margaret Williams that you've been forgetting to pay bills. Said she had to step in last month when the electricity was about to get shut off." Floyd's voice dropped lower. "She told the Jeffersons that you left the stove on all night 2 weeks ago, nearly burned the house down." My mouth went dry. Neither of those things had happened. My bills were set up on automatic payment through my bank, had been for years. As for the stove, I was religious about checking it before bed, a habit ingrained from decades of careful living. "That's not true, Floyd. None of it." "I know it's not." His voice carried the weight of friendship and years of knowing me. "But she's not stopping there. Yesterday at the coffee shop, she mentioned to a group of people that it might be time to think about guardianship options. Said the family was concerned about your ability to manage your affairs." The word guardianship hit me like a physical blow. I'd worked in banking for 43 years before retirement. I understood exactly what that meant. The legal stripping away of a person's autonomy, their right to make decisions about their own life and property. It was a process that, once started, was nearly impossible to reverse. "How many people has she talked to?" Floyd's silence was answer enough. The porch light cast long shadows across his face as he finally spoke. "Enough that when I mentioned seeing you at the hardware store last week, looking sharp and handling your business just fine, Tom Peterson said maybe I wasn't seeing the full picture. Said families often hide these things until they can't anymore." The systematic nature of it took my breath away. This wasn't casual gossip or innocent concern. This was a campaign, carefully orchestrated and precisely targeted. Esther was building a case against me in the court of public opinion, creating a foundation for something much larger. "Why are you telling me this?" Floyd stood up, finally meeting my eyes again. "Because you're my friend. Because what she's doing isn't right. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I think you should know before it goes any further." I picked up my grocery bags, feeling their weight differently now. Everything felt different now. "Thank you for coming to me with this, Floyd. I mean that." "What are you going to do?" The question hung in the cold air between us. What was I going to do? 24 hours ago, I'd been a retired man enjoying a quiet life in the home I'd lived in for over 2 decades. Now I was apparently under siege by my own daughter-in-law, my reputation being systematically destroyed in preparation for what could only be a legal assault on my independence. "I'm going to stop her," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Floyd nodded once, a sharp movement that spoke of approval and solidarity. "If you need anything, anything at all, you know where to find me." I watched him walk back to his own house, his figure disappearing into the darkness between our properties. Then I turned to my front door, my hand gripping the cold brass handle. Inside that house was my life, my sanctuary, my refuge from the world. But it was also, apparently, the target of someone I'd trusted, someone I'd welcomed into my family. The bags rustled against my legs as I stepped inside, but my mind was already racing ahead, planning, calculating. Esther thought she was playing chess with someone who didn't know the game had started. 13 days had passed since Floyd's warning. 13 days of watching and listening with the patience of a man who'd learned that information was the most valuable currency in any war. The house had taken on a different quality during those days. Every conversation carried weight. Every interaction held potential significance. I'd become a student of my own home, learning its rhythms and secrets in ways I never had before. The opportunity came on a Tuesday afternoon. Percy had left for his job at the engineering firm 20 minutes earlier, his usual routine unchanged. Esther remained in his old bedroom, the room that had become their temporary home, while they saved money for their own place. I'd been skeptical of that explanation from the beginning, but now I understood it for what it truly was, a strategic position. I moved through the hallway with deliberate quiet, my sock-covered feet making no sound on the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself just 2 years ago. The layout of the house worked in my favor. A small alcove near the bedroom door provided perfect concealment, while allowing clear audio access to conversations inside. Esther's voice carried through the thin door, confident and businesslike. She was on the phone, and from her tone, this wasn't a casual chat with a friend. "Yes, that's correct. He forgets to pay bills regularly now. Last month the utilities, this month the mortgage payment was 3 days late." Her voice held no emotion, just the efficient delivery of what she presented as facts. "No, Percy doesn't know the extent of it. I've been covering for his father to avoid family drama." My jaw clenched. The mortgage payment had never been late. I had confirmation statements to prove it, but I forced myself to remain still, to listen rather than react. This was intelligence gathering, not confrontation. "The house is worth at least $800,000, possibly more with the current market conditions in Boulder. It's been in the family for 23 years, no liens, completely paid off." Esther's voice took on a different quality when discussing money, sharper, more focused. "The location alone makes it valuable, and it's well maintained despite his recent difficulties." 800,000. She'd done her research, knew the property value down to specifics that suggested professional appraisal or extensive market analysis. This wasn't opportunistic greed. This was calculated planning. "I understand the process can take several months, but we need to start soon. His condition seems to be deteriorating, and I'm concerned about financial decisions he might make without proper supervision." She paused, presumably listening to someone on the other end. "No, there haven't been any official medical evaluations yet, but I have documentation of the incidents I mentioned. Neighbor complaints, unpaid bills, evidence of poor judgment." Documentation. She had documentation of things that never happened. The scope of her preparation was becoming clear. This wasn't just rumors and gossip. She was building a legal case with fabricated evidence. "Percy trusts me to handle his father's care. He works long hours and doesn't see what I see on a daily basis. When the time comes, he'll understand it's for everyone's protection." Her voice carried a note of satisfaction that made my stomach turn. "The guardianship petition should be straightforward given the circumstances." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering details about legal procedures, timelines, and what she called incident documentation. I listened to every word, cataloging each lie, each manipulation, each carefully constructed falsehood that formed the foundation of her plan. When she finally ended the call, I remained in position for several minutes, processing what I'd heard. This wasn't just about money, though the $800,000 figure made the financial motive clear. This was about control, about systematically dismantling my autonomy, while positioning herself as the concerned caretaker, forced to make difficult decisions. I moved back through the house with the same careful quiet, making my way to the small office I'd set up in the converted basement. The computer there was older but functional, and over the past 13 days, I'd been doing research of my own: security camera systems, recording devices, legal procedures for defending against false guardianship petitions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Esther was using technology and planning to trap me, so I would use the same tools to trap her. The difference was that my evidence would be real. I opened a new browser window and navigated to a security equipment website I'd bookmarked several days earlier: small, wireless cameras that could be concealed easily, recording devices that could capture hours of audio, systems that uploaded directly to cloud storage where they couldn't be tampered with or destroyed. The shopping cart filled quickly. Cameras for the living room, kitchen, and hallway outside the bedrooms. Audio recording devices for rooms where cameras might be too obvious. A central hub that would coordinate everything and ensure redundant backups of all recordings. As I entered my credit card information, I thought about Floyd's question from that night on the porch. What are you going to do? Now I knew I was going to let Esther continue her campaign, let her document her fictional incidents and build her false case. But every lie she told, every fabrication she created, every manipulation she attempted would be captured in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. She thought she was hunting a confused old man who didn't understand what was happening to him. Instead, she was walking into a trap set by someone who understood exactly what was at stake and was prepared to fight for it with every tool at his disposal. The order confirmation appeared on screen. Delivery scheduled for Thursday morning, installation appointment available the same afternoon. Percy would be at work. Esther would likely be out running errands or meeting with whatever lawyer she was conspiring with. Perfect timing for setting up the infrastructure that would document her own destruction. 8 days had passed since the security cameras arrived. 8 days of careful installation and testing while the house maintained its normal rhythms. The system worked flawlessly. Motion-activated recording, cloud storage, battery backup. Tonight would be its first real test. Christmas Eve dinner had been Esther's idea, naturally. Family should be together during the holidays, she'd announced to Percy 3 days earlier, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when making pronouncements about proper behavior. What she hadn't said, but what I understood perfectly, was that she wanted an audience for her performance. The small red light in the corner of the living room blinked steadily as I made final adjustments to the camera angle. Hidden behind a decorative plant, it captured the entire seating area where our guests would gather before dinner. The audio was crystal clear. I'd tested it extensively over the past week. "Dad, can you help me move this chair?" Percy called from the dining room, his voice carrying the slight tension it always held when Esther was orchestrating one of her social events. I found him wrestling with an antique oak chair that belonged near the window. Where does she want it? Against the wall, apparently. She's rearranging everything to accommodate Mom's wheelchair. Percy's expression showed the familiar frustration of a man caught between conflicting loyalties. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Esther directing operations with military precision, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that somehow made her look older than her 34 years. She'd chosen her outfit carefully. A conservative blue dress that suggested respectability and competence, the uniform of a responsible caretaker. The doorbell chimed at exactly 6:15. Mabel Perkins, Esther's mother, arriving with the punctuality that ran in their family like a genetic trait. I heard Esther's voice rise with manufactured warmth as she greeted her primary ally for the evening. "Mom, thank you so much for coming. I know this isn't easy with Dad's condition and all." Condition. The word drifted into the living room like poison gas, settling over everything with its implications of decline and dependency. I continued arranging magazines on the coffee table, my movement steady and deliberate, while the hidden camera captured every gesture. Mabel's response carried the satisfaction of someone whose worst suspicions were being confirmed. "How has he been, sweetheart? Any more episodes since we talked?" Episodes? Another carefully chosen word from Esther's vocabulary of manipulation. I'd never had an episode of anything, except perhaps occasional episodes of clarity about my daughter-in-law's true nature. "Well, you'll see tonight. I just hope he doesn't embarrass himself in front of Agnes." Esther's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that was perfectly audible in the adjacent room. Sometimes he gets confused about what year it is. The fabrication was so smooth, so casually delivered, that someone who didn't know better might accept it as fact. but the camera was recording every word, every inflection, every calculated manipulation. Agnes Spencer arrived 30 minutes later, bringing with her the warmth and genuine affection that had made her a family friend for over 2 decades. She hugged me with real feeling, her eyes bright with the pleasure of seeing an old friend. "Barney, you look wonderful. How are you managing in this big house all by yourself?" Before I could answer, Esther materialized beside us with the silent efficiency of a ghost. "Oh, he's not managing very well at all, are you, Dad?" Her hand landed on my shoulder with proprietary familiarity. "We've been discussing some options for making things easier." Agnes's eyebrows rose slightly. "Options?" "Just some help around the house," Esther said smoothly. "Maybe someone to handle the bills, keep track of appointments. You know how men are with organization." The casual sexism mixed with ageism created a toxic cocktail designed to make any resistance from me seem unreasonable. Agnes nodded politely, but I caught a flicker of something in her expression, perhaps the beginning of doubt about this carefully constructed narrative. Floyd arrived last, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. He knew what Esther had been saying about me, and his discomfort showed in the way he avoided her direct gaze while greeting everyone else with his usual straightforward warmth. "Barney." His handshake was firm, his eyes meeting mine with understanding. "Good to see you." "Floyd." I returned the pressure of his grip. "Thanks for coming." Esther watched this exchange with the sharp attention of a predator, sensing potential threats to her territory. "Floyd, how nice. I was just telling Agnes about some of the challenges we've been dealing with lately." "Challenges?" Floyd's voice held a careful neutrality that somehow conveyed volumes. "Dad's been having some difficulties with routine tasks, memory issues, confusion about dates and appointments." Esther's voice took on the practiced cadence of someone reciting a medical report. "Nothing dramatic, just the kind of gradual decline we all have to face eventually." The room fell silent. Agnes shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Percy stared at his hands. Floyd's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And in the corner, behind the decorative plant, the small red light continued to blink steadily, documenting every word for the permanent record that would ultimately be Esther's undoing. The dining room table gleamed under the chandelier light, set with the good china that had belonged to my late wife. Esther had insisted on using it, claiming it would make the evening more special. What she really meant was that it would make her performance more convincing. Who would suspect a devoted daughter-in-law who took such care with family traditions? 7:30 found us seated around the oak table that had hosted 3 decades of family meals. Esther had positioned herself at the head opposite me, with Percy caught between us like a demilitarized zone. The guests flanked us on either side, unwitting witnesses to what Esther clearly intended as the main event of her campaign. "The pot roast is delicious, dear," Mabel said, her voice carrying the approval of a mother whose daughter had exceeded expectations. "Doesn't she take wonderful care of everyone, Barney?" The question was loaded with implications, a setup for whatever direction Esther wanted the conversation to take. "She certainly keeps busy," I replied, cutting my meat with steady hands that contradicted any claims of tremors or coordination problems. "Too busy, really?" Esther's voice carried a note of martyred exhaustion. "Between taking care of the house and keeping track of Dad's affairs, sometimes I feel like I'm managing everything." Percy looked up from his plate with obvious discomfort. "Esther, maybe we could talk about something else tonight." "No, people need to understand what's happening." Esther's response came quick and sharp, revealing a flash of the steel beneath her concerned caregiver facade. "They need to know why certain decisions might have to be made." Agnes set down her fork with deliberate care. "What kind of decisions?" "Financial ones, mainly." Esther launched into what was clearly a prepared segment of her presentation. "Last month alone, Dad spent $1,200 on tools he doesn't need and won't use. The month before that, it was a subscription to 3 different magazines he'd already subscribed to. Every word was fiction, crafted with enough specificity to sound credible. The tools were a lawnmower attachment I'd researched carefully before purchasing. The magazine subscriptions existed only in Esther's imagination. $1,200 seems like a lot," Agnes said carefully. "It is a lot," Esther agreed, warming to her theme, "especially when there are more important things to spend money on. Home maintenance, medical care, planning for the future." Floyd cleared his throat. "Barney's always been careful with money, worked in banking for, 8 40 years? 43, I said quietly. Well, that was then. Esther's dismissal came with a wave of her hand that managed to sweep away 4 decades of professional financial management. Things change as we age. Judgment becomes compromised. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Percy shifted in his chair, his discomfort now visible to everyone at the table. Percy, tell everyone about the confusion with the insurance payments, Esther continued, turning to her husband with the confidence of someone who expected automatic support. Percy's face reddened. Esther, I don't think... No, it's important. Her voice carried a note of command that made Percy flinch. People need to understand the full scope of the situation. There is no confusion with insurance payments, I said, my voice calm but firm. Everything is current and has been for years. See? Esther's tone shifted to one of gentle correction, as if she were speaking to a child. This is exactly what I mean, the confusion, the defensiveness. These are classic signs. Signs of what? Floyd asked, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. Cognitive decline, early-stage dementia, possibly. Esther delivered the diagnosis with the authority of someone who'd clearly researched the terminology. It's more common than people think, especially in men his age. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Agnes stared at her plate. Mabel nodded sagely, as if Esther's words confirmed her own observations. Percy looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. That's quite a serious accusation, Floyd said slowly. It's not an accusation, it's a medical reality. Esther's voice remained steady, but something in her eyes had changed. And it's why certain legal protections might need to be put in place, for everyone's safety. What kind of legal protections? Agnes asked. Esther glanced around the table, gauging her audience before playing what she clearly considered her strongest card. Guardianship. Someone responsible needs to have oversight of financial decisions, medical care, daily living arrangements. It's my money, Esther, I said quietly. The words cut through the dining room like a blade. Esther's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the surface. For now it is, she replied, her voice carrying a threat that was unmistakable to everyone present. The room fell completely silent. Even Mabel seemed taken aback by the naked aggression in her daughter's tone. Percy's face had gone white, and he stared at his wife as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Agnes cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps we should talk about something more pleasant. But the damage was done. Esther had overplayed her hand, revealed too much of her true agenda too quickly. In her eagerness to build her case, she'd forgotten that credible performance required subtlety. And upstairs, in the cloud storage system that backed up everything in real time, every word of her performance was preserved in high-definition detail, waiting for the moment when it would be played back in a very different kind of theater. Coffee cups rattled against their saucers as we moved from the dining room into the living room, the evening's tension following us like an unwelcome guest. Agnes had suggested dessert might lighten the mood, but the damage from Esther's earlier performance hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. I settled into my favorite armchair, while the others arranged themselves around the room, with the careful positioning of people trying to avoid further confrontation. The hidden camera's tiny red light blinked steadily from its perch behind the fern, documenting everything with mechanical precision. Esther moved toward the hallway with purposeful steps, claiming she needed to freshen up. What she really needed was to retrieve something from upstairs, something that would complete the elaborate trap she'd been constructing all evening. I'd watched her earlier, during the dinner preparations, slipping into Percy's old room with the smooth efficiency of someone executing a well-rehearsed plan. "Mom, would you help me with the coffee service?" Esther called from the kitchen, her voice carrying a note of controlled excitement that only I seemed to notice. Mabel rose immediately, eager to support whatever her daughter had planned. The two women moved through the kitchen with synchronized purpose, their whispered conversation too quiet for the others to hear, but clearly audible to my strategically placed recording devices. When Esther returned to the living room 10 minutes later, her face had taken on a different quality, the calculated concern of someone preparing to deliver devastating news. She moved toward the small table where she'd placed her purse earlier, her movements deliberate and theatrical. "That's strange," she said, her voice carrying just enough worry to capture everyone's attention. Has anyone seen my watch, my Rolex? The question landed in the middle of our gathered group, like a stone dropped into still water. Agnes looked up from her coffee, Percy glanced around the room, and Floyd's expression grew carefully neutral. I left it right here on the table when we sat down for dinner. Esther's voice carried a note of growing concern as she made a show of searching through her purse. It was my grandmother's, worth about $15,000. $15,000. The figure was designed to underscore the seriousness of what was about to unfold. I remained still in my chair, watching her performance with the detached interest of someone who knew exactly how the play would end. "Are you sure you didn't put it somewhere else?" Agnes asked gently, her natural inclination toward problem-solving overriding the evening's earlier tensions. "Absolutely certain." Esther's voice grew firmer, more definitive. "I always put it in the same place when I take it off. Always. I'm very particular about valuable jewelry." She began a systematic search of the living room, moving from surface to surface with increasing urgency. Her performance was masterful, the concerned owner gradually becoming frantic as the reality of loss settled in. But I noticed how she avoided certain areas, how her search seemed designed more for dramatic effect than actual discovery. "Could it have fallen behind something?" Percy suggested, his engineer's mind seeking logical explanations. "Maybe it slipped off the table? Watches don't just disappear, Percy." Esther's tone carried a sharp edge that made him flinch. Someone had to have taken it. The word taken hung in the air like an accusation waiting to be born. Everyone in the room understood its implications, but no one wanted to be the first to voice what Esther was clearly building toward. "Now, let's not jump to conclusions," Floyd said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen where unfounded accusations could lead. Esther turned to face him, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been anticipation. "What other conclusion is there? A $15,000 watch doesn't just vanish into thin air." Her gaze swept the room, touching each face before settling on mine. I could see the moment she made her decision, the instant she chose to spring the trap she'd been constructing all evening. "You were in the bedroom earlier, weren't you, Dad?" The question came quietly, almost gently, but it carried the force of a sledgehammer. "I helped Percy move furniture," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "And you had access to the dresser where I left my watch." Her voice grew stronger, more confident. "You were the only one who went into that room alone." The accusations was building with mathematical precision, each element designed to create an inescapable conclusion. Agnes shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mabel nodded slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. Percy stared at his hands. "Are you suggesting I stole your watch, Esther?" The direct question forced her hand, made her commit to the path she'd chosen. For a moment she hesitated, perhaps recognizing that once spoken, certain words could never be taken back. "I'm not suggesting anything," she said finally, her voice carrying the cold certainty of someone delivering a verdict. "I'm telling you directly. You took my Rolex watch." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my response to an accusation that would change everything. "That's absurd." The words came out steady and firm, exactly as I'd rehearsed them in my mind. "I would never steal from anyone, especially not from family." But Esther was ready for my denial, had probably planned for it as carefully as she'd planned everything else. Her face crumpled with what appeared to be genuine anguish, though I knew it was merely another mask in her extensive collection. "Barney, what's happening here?" Agnes asked, her voice small and confused. The woman who'd known me for 20 years was struggling to reconcile the accusations with the man she thought she knew. "Dad, maybe you just picked it up without thinking?" Percy's voice carried the desperate hope of someone trying to find middle ground between impossible choices. "Maybe you got confused about whose it was." The suggestion hit exactly where Esther intended it to. Confused. The word carried all the implications of her earlier campaign about my supposed mental decline. Percy was offering me an escape route that would simultaneously confirm everything his wife had been saying about my competency. "I'm not confused, Percy. I didn't take any watch." I kept my voice level, refusing to give them the emotional reaction they seemed to expect. Mabel spoke for the first time since the accusation began. "Esther doesn't lie, Barney. She's never been the type to make things up." The mother's support for her daughter was absolute and unquestioning, delivered with the conviction of someone who'd already chosen sides without examining the evidence. It was exactly the kind of blind loyalty Esther had counted on. "Maybe we should all take a step back," Floyd suggested, his discomfort obvious. "There might be a simple explanation for this." "There is a simple explanation." Esther's voice grew harder, more demanding. "Someone in this room took my watch, and I want it back." She stood in the center of the living room, like a prosecutor addressing a jury, her entire posture radiating righteous indignation. The performance was flawless, designed to generate sympathy while painting me as the obvious culprit. "If you're so certain I took it," I said quietly, "perhaps you'd like to search my pockets." The suggestion caught her off guard for just a moment. She'd been building toward this exact moment, but my willingness to be searched seemed to disrupt her planned timeline. She recovered quickly, though, her natural cunning reasserting itself. "I don't want to embarrass you, Dad. If you just return it, we can pretend this never happened." The offer was poisoned honey, designed to make me appear guilty regardless of my response. If I accepted, I'd be admitting guilt. If I refused, I'd look like someone with something to hide. "I have nothing to hide," I said, standing slowly from my chair. "Search away." Percy looked stricken. Agnes appeared on the verge of tears. Even Floyd seemed uncomfortable with the direction events were taking. Only Mabel watched with obvious satisfaction, as if justice was finally being served. Esther approached me with theatrical reluctance, her movements suggesting this was the last thing she wanted to do. She began with my shirt pockets, patting them down with professional thoroughness. Her hands moved to my pants pockets next, finding nothing but my wallet and keys. "Maybe you put it somewhere else," she said, her voice carrying a note of frustrated confusion. "Maybe in your jacket?" My jacket hung on the coat rack near the front door, exactly where I'd left it when the guests began arriving. We all moved toward it together, a small procession of witnesses to what everyone believed would be either vindication or final condemnation. Esther's hand slipped into the inside pocket of my jacket, with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she would find. Her fingers closed around something solid, and her face transformed with a mixture of triumph and what might have been genuine surprise at her own success. "What's this?" she asked, her voice rising with theatrical shock. She pulled out a man's Rolex watch, its gold band catching the light from the overhead fixture. It was an expensive piece, exactly the kind of heirloom jewelry that might be worth $15,000. The gasps from our audience were audible. Agnes covered her mouth with her hands. Percy's face went white. Mabel nodded with grim satisfaction. Even Floyd seemed stunned by the physical evidence. "I don't understand," I said, staring at the watch in Esther's hand. "I've never seen that before in my life." But my protests sounded weak even to my own ears. The evidence was tangible, undeniable, discovered in front of multiple witnesses. Esther had orchestrated the perfect crime, complete with physical proof and a room full of people to testify to the discovery. "How did this get in my jacket?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear how she would explain the mechanics of her own frame job. "You tell me," Esther replied, her voice now carrying the cold authority of someone who'd been proven right. "It's your jacket, in your house, with my stolen watch hidden inside." The logic was unassailable from their perspective. I was the homeowner, it was my jacket, and the watch had been found exactly where a guilty person might hide stolen property. Esther had constructed the perfect trap, with me as the only possible suspect. Around us, the living room had become a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided by the evidence. But what none of them knew was that every moment of this elaborate performance was being recorded in crystal clear detail, building a different kind of case entirely. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, vibrating with unspoken accusations and the weight of what everyone believed they had witnessed. Esther stood in the center of the room, the Rolex gleaming in her palm like a golden trophy, while I remained seated in my chair with the calm of a man who'd been expecting exactly this moment. "Well," she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose suspicions had been vindicated, "I suppose that settles it." But settling it wasn't enough for Esther. I could see the hunger in her eyes, the need to extract every ounce of advantage from the situation she'd orchestrated. This wasn't just about recovering a watch she'd never actually lost. This was about establishing her narrative so completely that no one would ever question her version of events again. Agnes shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her loyalty torn between the evidence of her own eyes and decades of friendship with someone she'd never known to be dishonest. "Barney, I don't understand. Why would you take Esther's watch?" The question hung in the air like an invitation to confession, but I maintained my position. "I didn't take anything, Agnes. I've never seen that watch before in my life." "It was in your pocket," Mabel's voice cracked with indignation. "We all saw it. How do you explain that?" Percy had been silent since the discovery, his face a mask of disappointment and confusion. When he finally spoke, his words cut deeper than any accusation Esther could have made. "Dad, maybe you should tell us what really happened." The suggestion that I might be confused, that my memory couldn't be trusted, played directly into everything Esther had been building toward. She seized on it immediately, her voice taking on the gentle tone of someone speaking to a child. "It's okay, Dad. These things happen. The important thing is that we get you the help you need." She looked around the room, gathering support from our audience. "This is exactly what I've been trying to tell everyone. The forgetfulness, the confusion about what belongs to whom. It's textbook cognitive decline." Floyd finally found his voice, though it came out rough and uncertain. "Maybe we're jumping to conclusions here. Maybe there's some other explanation." What other explanation could there be? Esther's response was sharp, cutting off any alternative theories before they could take root. "The watch was in his pocket. He admits to being in the bedroom where it was taken from. He's been showing signs of mental deterioration for months." Her case was airtight from their perspective, each piece of evidence building on the others to create an unshakable foundation. What made it even more powerful was how reasonable she sounded, how concerned and loving her words appeared to be. "I think," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "that we need to have a serious family discussion about guardianship, about making sure Dad is protected from making decisions that could hurt him or others." The word guardianship hit the room like a physical blow. This was the endgame, the prize she'd been maneuvering toward from the very beginning. Not just control over my finances, but legal authority over every aspect of my life. "Now hold on," Floyd said, his discomfort finally overriding his desire to avoid conflict. "You can't just declare someone incompetent because of one incident." "One incident?" Esther's laugh held no humor. "Floyd, you know better than anyone what I've been dealing with. The unpaid bills, the inappropriate purchases, the confusion about basic tasks. This watch theft is just the latest in a pattern of concerning behavior." She was building her case in real time, using the stolen watch as evidence of a broader mental decline that existed only in her fabricated narratives. Each lie was delivered with such conviction that even Floyd seemed to waver in his certainty. "What I'm suggesting," Esther said, looking around the room at each face in turn, "is that we contact a lawyer tomorrow, get a proper evaluation done, make sure Dad has the protection and oversight he needs during this difficult time." The manipulation was masterful. She'd positioned herself as the caring daughter-in-law, looking out for my best interests, while simultaneously moving to strip away my autonomy and seize control of my assets. And she was doing it all in front of witnesses who would later testify to her compassionate concern and my apparent mental decline. Percy nodded slowly, his engineer's mind processing the logical sequence she'd presented. Maybe that would be best, for everyone's peace of mind. My own son was betraying me, convinced by his wife's systematic manipulation that I was the problem that needed to be solved. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very son I was trying to protect from Esther's schemes was now her most valuable ally in destroying me. "Well then," I said quietly, my voice cutting through their planning, "I suppose tomorrow will be a very interesting day." Esther's smile was radiant with triumph as she surveyed her conquered territory. She'd won everything she'd wanted. The watch recovered, my guilt established in front of witnesses, and preliminary agreement for the guardianship proceedings that would give her legal control over my life and assets. "I'm just glad we found it," she said, slipping the Rolex onto her wrist with theatrical relief. "This watch means everything to me. It was my grandmother's, the only thing I have left of her." The lie came so smoothly that for a moment I almost admired her skill. There was no grandmother, no sentimental attachment. The watch was simply a prop in an elaborate performance designed to destroy my independence. But she delivered the fiction with such convincing emotion that even Agnes nodded sympathetically. I can't imagine how violated you must feel, Mabel said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. Having someone you trust steal from you like that. It's not about the money, Esther continued, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated vulnerability. It's about the betrayal of trust. How can we feel safe in our own home if we can't trust family members not to take our personal belongings? Percy winced at the implication, his discomfort obvious as he struggled to reconcile the father he'd known with the thief Esther was painting me to be. Dad's never done anything like this before. That you know of, Esther corrected gently. How many other small items have gone missing over the past few months? How many times have you assumed you'd simply misplace something when it might have been taken? She was planting seeds of doubt about every interaction, every missing item, every moment of confusion that Percy might have experienced in my presence. The psychological manipulation was surgical in its precision. She was rewriting months of family history to support her narrative of my decline. Floyd stood up abruptly, his face flushed with what might have been anger or embarrassment. I should probably head home. This feels like family business. No, please stay, Esther said quickly. You're Dad's oldest friend. Your perspective on his recent behavior could be valuable when we meet with the lawyers. The request was phrased as a favor, but I heard the underlying command. Floyd's testimony about the rumors she'd been spreading would be crucial to her case, and she wanted to ensure his cooperation while he was still shaken by the evening's revelations. I don't know what to think anymore, Agnes said softly, her voice heavy with confusion and disappointment. Barney, we've been friends for 20 years. Why would you do this? The pain in her voice was genuine, and for the first time that evening, I felt a flicker of anger at what Esther was putting these innocent people through. Agnes didn't deserve to have her faith in humanity shaken by someone else's manipulation. Floyd didn't deserve to be used as a weapon in Esther's war against me. Agnes, I said carefully, I need you to know that whatever happens in the coming days, our friendship has meant everything to me. Your loyalty and trust have been gifts I've treasured for decades. My words seemed to confuse her further, as if I were saying goodbye rather than protesting my innocence. But I was saying goodbye to the version of our relationship that existed before Esther's poison took hold. The important thing now, Esther said, smoothly redirecting the conversation back to her agenda, is getting Dad the help he needs. Early intervention can make a real difference in these cases. She was already talking about me in the third person again, as if my presence in the room was merely a formality. The transformation from accused to patient was happening in real time, facilitated by her skillful manipulation of everyone's desire to help and protect. I'll call our family lawyer first thing in the morning, Percy said, his voice heavy with reluctant duty. Get his advice on how to proceed with the evaluation process. That's very wise, Mabel agreed. The sooner these things are addressed, the better for everyone involved. They were making plans for my legal destruction while I sat in my own living room, watching the systematic dismantling of my autonomy with the detached fascination of someone observing a particularly complex piece of machinery in operation. Well, I said, rising from my chair with deliberate slowness, it's getting late. Perhaps our guests should be heading home. The suggestion was ignored as Esther launched into a detailed discussion of evaluation procedures and legal requirements. She was savoring her victory, unwilling to let the evening end before she'd extracted every possible advantage from the situation. But I was content to let her celebrate. Let her believe she'd won completely. Let her commit herself fully to the narrative she'd constructed. Because tomorrow, when the lawyers she was so eager to involve began examining the evidence, they would discover that some cases contained more documentation than anyone had expected. The living room had transformed into something resembling a courtroom where the verdict had already been delivered, and now the only question was how severe the punishment would be. Esther stood at the center of it all like a prosecutor who just delivered a closing argument that left no room for reasonable doubt. This is what I've been trying to tell everyone, she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of complete vindication. The lies, the theft, the confusion about reality. It's all part of a pattern that can't be ignored anymore. She held the Rolex like a piece of evidence that had solved a complex mystery, its gold surface catching the overhead light in a way that seemed to emphasize its importance. What struck me most was how naturally she'd stepped into the role of victim seeking justice, her performance so polished that even I might have believed it if I hadn't known better. I hate to say this, Mabel said, her voice heavy with reluctant judgment. But at his age, this kind of behavior is shameful. Stealing from family members who've shown him nothing but love and care. Percy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, caught between the evidence of his own eyes and whatever remained of his loyalty to me. Maybe we should just handle this privately. Keep it in the family. No. Esther's response was sharp and immediate. That's exactly the kind of thinking that enables this behavior. If we don't take appropriate action, what's to stop him from doing it again? What if next time it's something more serious? The escalation was strategic and brilliantly executed. She was positioning the watch theft not as an isolated incident, but as the beginning of a potentially dangerous pattern that required immediate intervention. Think about it logically, she continued, her voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone who'd clearly thought through every angle. We've already established that he's been having memory problems, confusion about finances, inappropriate purchases. Now, we have proof of stealing. What comes next? What happens when his condition deteriorates further? Her logic was devastating in its apparent reasonableness. Each point built upon the previous lies she'd established, creating a narrative that seemed to demand immediate action for everyone's protection. Agnes, Esther said, turning to our longtime family friend, with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Would you please call the police? This needs to be handled officially. Agnes looked stricken. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse, fishing inside for her phone with obvious reluctance. Are you certain this is necessary? Barney's been our friend for 20 years. That's exactly why it's necessary, Esther replied with cold logic. Friends don't steal from each other. If he were truly our friend, he wouldn't have violated our trust like this. The manipulation was surgical in its precision. Every objection was anticipated and countered before it could take root. Every alternative was dismissed as inadequate or dangerous. Agnes found herself nodding slowly, her resistance crumbling under the weight of Esther's carefully constructed arguments. Besides, Esther added, her voice softening with what appeared to be genuine concern, if we don't document this officially, how can we protect him from himself? How can we get the legal authority we need to ensure he receives proper care? There it was, the real agenda wrapped in the language of compassion. She wasn't calling the police to punish me. She was calling them to create the legal foundation for guardianship proceedings. The theft charge would be the cornerstone of her case for my incompetency. Floyd stood up suddenly, his face flushed with what might have been anger or shame. This is wrong. This whole thing feels wrong. What feels wrong, Mabel said sharply, is defending someone who's just been caught red-handed stealing from his own family. What feels wrong is making excuses for criminal behavior. But this is Barney we're talking about, Floyd protested, his voice carrying the desperation of someone watching a friend drown. I've known him for 32 years. He's never taken so much as a paper clip that didn't belong to him. People change, Floyd, Esther said with practiced sympathy. Cognitive decline affects judgment and impulse control. The Barney you knew 20 years ago isn't the same person sitting in that chair tonight. Floyd's protest died in his throat, overwhelmed by the collective judgment of the room. Even his knowledge of the truth seemed insufficient against the physical evidence that everyone had witnessed. Percy finally found his voice, though it came out hollow and uncertain. Dad, if you're having problems, if you're confused about things, we can get you help. But you have to be honest with us. The invitation to confess was delivered with what appeared to be loving concern, but I could see the trap embedded within it. Any admission of confusion would be used as evidence of my incompetency. Any denial would be dismissed as further proof of my deteriorating mental state. Agnes held her phone with obvious reluctance, her finger hovering over the emergency number. I never thought I'd be making this kind of call about you, Barney. The pain in her voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt a flicker of regret for putting her through this ordeal. But the larger justice required these smaller injustices, and Agnes would understand once the full truth was revealed. Just dial 911. Esther instructed, her voice carrying the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. Tell them we have a theft in progress, that we've caught the perpetrator with stolen property. She was orchestrating every detail of my destruction with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. Each instrument played its part. Percy's reluctant betrayal, Mabel's righteous indignation, Agnes's dutiful compliance, Floyd's silenced protests. Percy watched his wife orchestrate the destruction of his father with the expression of someone witnessing a traffic accident, horrified, but unable to look away. Part of him still loved me, I could see that, but the evidence was too strong and his wife's logic too compelling. Once the police have documented everything, Esther continued, we can move forward with the guardianship proceedings I mentioned earlier. Get Dad the professional evaluation he needs, establish legal protections for his assets, ensure he's placed in appropriate care. She was already discussing my future as if I were a problem to be managed rather than a person with rights. The transformation from family member to legal ward was happening in real time, facilitated by her systematic manipulation of everyone's desire to help and protect. Wait, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Everyone turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance that I would interrupt this moment of justice. Agnes paused with her finger still poised over the phone, grateful for any excuse to delay the call. Before you make that call, I continued, my voice steady and calm, there's something you should know, something that changes everything about what you think you've witnessed tonight. Esther's eyes narrowed with suspicion, perhaps sensing that her victory might not be as complete as she'd believed. What are you talking about? I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd allowed myself all evening. I'm talking about the security camera that's been recording everything that's happened in this room tonight. The silence that followed my words was absolute, as if the entire room had suddenly been drained of oxygen. Esther's face went through a rapid series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, and then the first flicker of genuine fear I'd seen from her all evening. What camera? She asked, her voice smaller than it had been moments before. I raised my hand slowly and pointed toward the corner of the room where the small device sat hidden behind the decorative fern. That camera, the one that's been recording everything since our guests arrived tonight. Agnes lowered her phone without dialing, her eyes following my gesture to the tiny red light that had been blinking steadily throughout the evening. Floyd's face showed recognition dawning. He was beginning to understand that there had been another game being played beneath the surface of what everyone thought they'd witnessed. You see, I continued, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who held all the winning cards. About 3 weeks ago, I installed a complete security system in this house. Motion-activated cameras, audio recording, cloud storage backup. Everything that's happened tonight has been documented in high-definition detail. Esther's grip on the Rolex tightened, her knuckles going white as the implications of my words began to sink in. This is entrapment. No, I said gently. This is evidence. Evidence of you planting that watch in my jacket pocket while I was in the kitchen, helping Percy with the furniture. Evidence of your systematic campaign to undermine my reputation and steal my assets. The color was draining from Percy's face as his engineer's mind worked through the logical implications of what I was saying. Dad, are you telling us that... I'm telling you that your wife has been planning this exact scenario for months. The rumors about my mental decline, the false stories about unpaid bills and confused behavior, the guardianship proceedings she's been researching with her lawyer. I looked directly at Esther, whose face had taken on the expression of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse in real time. All of it was designed to strip away my legal autonomy so she could gain control of this house and my assets. That's impossible, Mabel protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Esther would never... The camera recorded her telling you yesterday about her plan to find evidence of my stealing, I said quietly. It also recorded her conversation with what I assume was her attorney, discussing the timeline for guardianship proceedings and the estimated value of this property. Esther's face had gone completely white now, the confident mask she'd worn all evening finally slipping to reveal the panic beneath. You can't use recordings made without my consent. Colorado is a one-party consent state for audio recordings, I replied with the precision of someone who'd done his research thoroughly. And I have every legal right to install security cameras in my own home. But more importantly, I have video evidence of you committing fraud and filing false accusations. Floyd found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You knew all along. I've known since December 2nd, when you came to warn me about the rumors she was spreading. I smiled at my old friend, whose loyalty had made this moment possible. Thank you for that, by the way. It gave me time to prepare. Prepare for what? Percy asked, his voice hollow with growing understanding. To document everything, to let her believe she was succeeding while gathering irrefutable evidence of her manipulation. I stood up slowly, moving toward the television in the corner of the room. Would you like to see some of the footage? I think it might be educational. Esther lunged forward as if to stop me, but Percy caught her arm. No, I want to see this. I need to understand what's been happening in my own family. The television screen flickered to life, and suddenly we were watching a high-definition replay of earlier that evening. The timestamp in the corner showed 8:15 p.m., and there was Esther, moving with careful precision toward my jacket while I was in the kitchen. The room watched in stunned silence as she reached into her purse, withdrew the Rolex, and deliberately placed it in my jacket pocket. Her movements were quick but methodical, and her face showed none of the confusion or distress she'd displayed later when discovering the theft. That's not... I was just... Esther's voice cracked as she watched herself commit the crime she'd accused me of. Here's another interesting moment, I said, advancing the footage to show her earlier conversation with Mabel in the kitchen. Their whispered discussion was perfectly audible on the recording, including Esther's comment about how everything was going according to plan. Agnes was staring at Esther with the expression of someone seeing a familiar person in an entirely new light. Esther, is this true? But Esther had moved beyond denial into damage control mode. Even if there is a camera, it doesn't prove anything. Maybe I picked up the watch by mistake. Maybe I was confused about where I put it. The camera recorded you deliberately placing the watch in my jacket pocket at 8:15 this evening, I said calmly. It also recorded you telling your mother yesterday that you were planning to find evidence of my stealing. Would you like me to play that conversation back for everyone? Percy was staring at his wife, as if seeing her for the first time, his face cycling through emotions. Betrayal, horror, disgust. Esther, tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't actually do this. Percy, you have to understand, I was doing this for us, for our future. That house is worth $800,000, and he's just going to leave it to some charity or the government when he dies. We deserve that money. We're his family. The naked greed in her voice was stunning in its honesty. She'd dropped all pretense of concern for my welfare, revealing the financial motivation that had driven everything from the beginning. The color drained from Mabel's face as she realized that her daughter's victory celebration was turning into something very different. Esther, what have you done? The security system has been uploading everything to cloud storage in real time, I continued. Even if you tried to destroy the local equipment, the evidence would still exist. Timestamps, metadata, audio quality, everything a court would need to understand exactly what happened here tonight. Esther's composure finally cracked completely. You manipulated me. You set me up. I documented you, I corrected. I gave you every opportunity to choose a different path, to be honest with your husband, to treat me with the respect I'd earned through 43 years of honest work and 23 years of treating you like family. Instead, you chose to try to destroy me. Percy's voice was hollow when he finally spoke. Esther, how could you do this? To him? To us? To our marriage? Our marriage was never going to survive on your engineer's salary, she snapped, her mask finally completely gone. Do you know what it's like having friends whose husbands are doctors and lawyers while I'm married to someone who fixes bridges? This house was our chance to have the life we deserve. The cruelty of her words hung in the air like poison. Percy recoiled as if he'd been physically struck, finally seeing the woman he'd married for, who she truly was. But Esther was beyond answering questions, beyond maintaining any pretense of innocence. The systematic manipulation that had taken months to construct had been demolished in minutes by simple technological documentation. Agnes set her phone down with trembling hands. I almost called the police on an innocent man. You almost called the police on the victim of an elaborate fraud, I said gently. The difference matters. Floyd walked over to where I sat and placed his hand on my shoulder. 43 years I've known you, Barney. I should have trusted that judgment over everything else. You tried to warn me, Floyd. That took courage, and I'll never forget it. Around us, the living room that had been a courtroom just minutes before had become something different, a place where truth had finally triumphed over manipulation, where justice had been served not through punishment, but through revelation. The Rolex still gleamed in Esther's hand, but now it looked less like evidence and more like what it had always been. A prop in an elaborate performance that had finally reached its conclusion. Percy stood up slowly, his movements mechanical, as he processed the complete destruction of his marriage and his understanding of the woman he'd thought he loved. "I need you to leave, Esther, tonight. I can't even look at you right now. Percy, please, we can work through this. I did it for us, for our future together." "You did it for money," he said quietly. "You were willing to destroy my father's life, to have him declared incompetent and locked away, all for money. There is no us after something like this." The final threads of Esther's carefully constructed web were snapping one by one, leaving her isolated in the center of a room full of people who now saw her clearly for the first time. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.